Set in the year 2356, the novel unfolds amidst a backdrop of interstellar conflict and political intrigue, centering on Prince Ral of the werewolf House of Nightclaw. Grappling with the aftermath of a harrowing encounter with tiger shifters, Ral locks his injured sister, Princess Syria, into a medical stasis capsule, signaling the beginning of a desperate escape attempt. Ral, a figure adorned with multiple titles and responsibilities, finds himself relying on the aid of an exo-armored soldier, the protagonist, who narrates the tale. Despite his princely status, Ral is depicted as battle-worn and unyielding, his rugged appearance belying a lifetime of training and privilege. The soldier, initially resistant to Ral's authoritative demeanor, is tasked with extracting the royal siblings to safety. Their journey intersects with themes of personal sacrifice and loyalty, as Ral's determination to retrieve his people from enemy territory, regardless of the cost, highlights the depth of his commitment. Meanwhile, the soldier, bound by duty yet sympathetic to Ral's cause, struggles with the ethical dilemma of following orders versus aiding a noble quest. The narrative further delves into interpersonal dynamics, introducing the soldier's reunion with her sister Lauren in New Tokyo, where Lauren's relationship with Xavier, a longtime family friend turned werewolf, adds a layer of complexity and warmth. This subplot intertwines with the central narrative, reinforcing the theme of found family and the unexpected alliances formed in times of strife. Ral's character development is marked by his willingness to seek approval from the soldier, a deviation from his royal upbringing, indicating a growing respect for her judgment and capabilities. This shift hints at the potential for a deeper bond between the two, transcending their initial roles as captor and rescuer. Amidst the tension and danger, the novel explores the dichotomy of power and vulnerability, as well as the transformative nature of trust in the face of adversity. The story sets the stage for a broader discussion on the dynamics of peace and war among the star-born races, suggesting that the fragile truce between the werewolves and tiger shifters may soon unravel, with implications that resonate across the galaxy. Ultimately, the novel combines elements of sci-fi adventure with the complexities of personal relationships, offering a thrilling ride through a universe where love, loyalty, and the struggle for survival converge in unexpected ways. Chapter 1. 2356 CE. His Royal Wolfiness, Prince Ral of the House of Nightclaw, Duke of something or other and holder of a ludicrous number of other titles, locked his injured, unconscious sister into the med stasis capsule. He turned and approached me in human form. The prince was covered in grime and blood, his hair matted with dirt, his shirt shredded exposing glimpses of scarred hard muscle. Filthy never looked so good. Looking at that chiseled jaw, those two full lips, I knew he was going to be impossible. People across the galaxy paid lifetimes for that kind of perfection, but cosmetic surgery didn't work on werewolves. All it meant was that the prince had had a lifetime of conditioning, a lifetime to believe he was a gift of the stars and a lifetime at exploiting others using his looks, prestige and power. He turned and watched as the medbots chimed, escort the capsule from the hangar bay. I didn't know what the tiger shifters had done to her, but I would look at the report later. A medbot stumbled. Don't jolt her, he snarled. Then the prince stalked toward me. My exo-armor with its mirrored visor and small dull black-scaled plates was designed to make an adversary think twice, but he was completely unfazed, or at least he had the appearance of being so. Men like him knew about facades. He looked at me as if I were his mother's serving android. Be ready, soldier. After we get Princess Syria to safety, we're coming back to Altai. A hello or thanks for risking your lives to save us even though we're not your subjects would have been nice rather than an order. But this was to be expected. I triggered my exo-armor's retreat. The helmet and suit opened, folding itself into my harness. The air smelled of exhaust and something burnt. Sorry, Your Majesty. Our orders are to 1. Get you off the Tiger's planet. And 2. Escort both of you to neutral ground on Chandrayan Station. Ice blue eyes focused on me. Nostrils flared, taking in my scent. You're not one of us. I lifted my chin, strengthened my stance. No. I'm an officer of the United Coalition Space Force. And unfortunately for you, sir, you are not part of my chain of command. Surprise cracked his facade. My ship had no markings and my exo-armor had no insignias. Technically the Coalition and his kidnappers, the Tigrantine Protectorate, were at peace, but if the Tigers caught us helping a wolf escape, things probably wouldn't stay that way. I threw him a rescue pack. It thumped as it hit the floor between us. He folded his arms, leaned against a pillar. The coalition finally decided to honor their agreements. If that was how he wanted to play, so be it. I have to obey orders, but not from you. He stalked forward, trying to intimidate me. Take me to the captain of this ship. He will see reason. The ship jerked to the side. The alarm screamed. I pitched into him and we fell to the floor, me on top of him. My cheek pressed up against the ridges of his naked abdomen. A mud-covered crotch was microns away from my nose. He smelled of dirt and greenery, things I hadn't smelled in years. My co-pilot's voice blared over the comm. Captain, we've got cats up our ass. Lots of them. I got up and ran, my boots thumping up the metal-grated stairs to the cockpit. I slid into the pilot's seat, taking control of the yoke. Safety harnesses clicked while floating screens surrounded me immediately. Across the wall of images, a shower of red dots spread. Each one signaled an individual fighter. In the next 40 seconds, the fastest starfighters would be in range. Red's voice trembled. Did they send their entire fleet? She swore in another language under her breath. Red dots swirled on screen, forming into an enveloping claw-like cloud. Panic sharpened Red's voice. Quasar range weapons went live. Whole dark. I cursed. The prince's voice snapped. They won't shoot to kill. I hadn't realized he had followed and taken the jump seat in my cockpit. Sit down and shut up. Your Majesty. I tapped glowing dots, redirecting the plasma thrusters. Lasers set to cripple aren't going to aid in our escape, Prince. I dodged an initial warning shot. Red, check the princess. Red sucked in a deep breath and blew it out abruptly. She tapped another screen. Holding steady. Her stasis capsule should minimize the stress. Dropping the gravity will help, too. With a swipe at a screen, we were all suddenly weightless. I glanced at another screen. The hyperjump engines were still charging and there was no way I'd get to the nearest wormhole. I'd have to turn and fight. The old-fashioned way. Blood pumped in my veins, a drum of hot anticipation. All my senses shot to hyper mode. In the reflection of the window beyond the floating screens, I saw Red's fear in her widened pupils. On another screen, the volley of lasers looked like a veil of shimmering light homing in on us. This was what I lived for. I located the drone mines Red had dropped and triggered them. Joyful explosions knocked out the forefront of the pursuing squadron. 2 fighters streaked towards me. I laughed at their scissor formation so clearly, telegraphing their intentions. Fuck you, gory fucking fatherfuckers. The stars spun around us as I shoved my ship to its limits. On screen we shot. For the other fighters, my heart beeping in time with the alerts of increasing irrevocability of a multi-ship collision course. In the distant background, a beast-like snarl rumbled like thunder. Too much was on the line. I was going to win. Red's voice cut into my focus. Captain. Crashing was inevitable. Watch and learn, Red. The other fighter was a ship's length away from us when I spun the ship into a corkscrew and dumped the drone mines out our back end. Eat shit and die. Lights flashed, a soundless staccato of rainbow lights. I was immersed immediately in a sea of red light from the screens, signaling more incoming. Above, below, in front, behind. I laughed. Again? You want to play? Let's see if you measure up. I glanced at the jump engine screen. Charge was almost there. My stomach flipped. What the fuck was that line of code doing there? Red, the jump. Flare, Captain, there's. Fix it, Red. Acceleration smashed me into my seat. Sat on my chest, making each breath an act of willpower. Fear splashed my senses. Sweat and ozone tinged the humid air while the beeps and chimes on the screens resounded in my head. Salt covered my dry lips as sweat streamed down my face. The tigers were crawling all over us like scapesex on a corpse. I thought of the people counting on me. Red, junior pilot, fresh out of flight school. A prince and possibly the galactic peace of 3 empires. Fuck fear. I would fucking do this. I deployed decoy drones, each emitting the same frequency and signature as my ship. Unless they had a close visual, the pilots would have to make a choice. And like felines to rodents, my decoy drones lured some dots away, which left 54 dance partners remaining. Ah, so sweet of them to wait, I said out loud. What? Snarled the prince behind me. How's that jump engine, Red? Almost working. I need about 20 seconds. I picked the quadrant closest to the nearest wormhole. It's yours. I had the advantage in that I shot to kill while they shot to capture, but they had the numbers. More flashes of light. explosions, shrapnel streaming through space. Spinning around dodging, martial dancers had nothing on me because you can't keep up with me, you see me but you can't catch me, nope not yours or yours, I'm fucking free in your face. Baby, I roared. Who's ready to play? Suddenly the screen bathed us in a sea of red light. Crackling on the comms, then hissing snarls in Tigerese. Hras hikrsa. I silenced the comms with a swipe, laughing. Nope. No surrender for you. And suddenly I saw the gleam of instant death as the screen pulsated, lights in. Alarm, a fucking missile. Alarms blared. They'd fired a whole dark missile and it was heading towards us. It's hot, yelled Red. No coordinates. No destination. Go, I screamed, and the engines screamed. With me. We jumped. New stars appeared all around us. All the adrenaline rushed out of me. The GS stopped and I was weightless once more. The gravity generator kicked in, and I slumped back in my seat, savoring deep, beautiful breaths of life and freedom. I laughed and punched the air. Crazy whole dark luck had liked my moves today. Now that was fun. Red groaned. I think I left my stomach behind. Looking over at Red, I saw she was bit pale, the opposite of what her face usually was after drinking, which is how she got her nickname, but no worse. For the wear. Top of her class, but this was her first real mission. I think. It might have even been her first real dogfight. The princess? I asked, knowing it would help Red focus. She sucked in another breath and straightened before reaching out to tap a screen. Looks like she's asleep. You okay back there, Your Majesty? When he didn't reply, I turned to look at him. His eyes were closed, gritted. Teeth and muscles tense as he continued gripping the armrests. I don't know if he had moved a single muscle since I'd last looked at him. So the werewolf prince could hold it together? It actually made me respect him, but only the tiniest bit. His voice trembled with rage or nausea, I couldn't tell. You're psychotic. Outflying others always made me feel like I was the cleverest pilot in the universe. I took the high line. Sorry. Not really used to flying with passengers. His blue eyes opened. What do you mean you're not used to flying with passengers? Red grabbed a floating screen and pulled it down to her. Captain was a Starbolt pilot. Starbolts, he repeated. The Coalition's super-secret deep space fighter. That didn't officially exist until a year ago. I had been grounded since I disobeyed orders and crashed my Starbolt. But he didn't need to know that. I had to end this conversation before Red started blathering about my crash record. Red, go check the engines. To vex me further, the prince moved into Red's vacated space like a wolf on the prowl. So the Coalition risks a former Starbolt pilot to come to our aid. Did you have to go to a special flight school where you earn PhDs in deep space physics and interstellar avionics? I let myself look at him for a moment. He was a sarcastic bastard. It was a sin how some people got all the pretty in their genes. Is there something you need, Your Majesty? There was the barest flash of a strange look on his face, but it was gone. Before I could figure out what it was. The correct address is Highness. He paused. You're not what I expected a Starbolt pilot to look like. Oh please. Don't tell me he thought like a first earther. I was fit but completely the opposite of their old-fashioned standards of beauty. A curvy girl with big everything. Ass, boobs, arms and legs. And what is a Starbolt pilot supposed to look like? I paused. Your Majesty. His gaze intensified. He glanced at my hands. Not like a woman who has pink fingernails. I leaned back in my captain's chair, trying to appear as relaxed as possible. He might have been a prince, but he was not my prince. I was the captain and this was my ship. Hey, I like my pink fingernails, thank you very much. I went back to my screens. You can go now. I want to speak with your superiors. Again with the demands. This was getting old. Lightspeed fast, I swiveled my chair to face him. Is this an official request? Yes. You'll have to submit it in writing. His eyes turned gold. I might even be able to dig out some actual paper and print them out for you. All that seething angry power tensed. Trouble is, I just don't think I have any paper writing instrument on this ship. I smiled slowly. I suppose I'll just have to settle for you asking nicely and saying please. He placed his rather large, dirty hands on my armrest, invading my personal space. It was an alpha shifter trick. That much I had been warned about. I should have been prepared for his scent of fresh soil and greenery, the Kind of smell that reminded me what it was like to live in sunlight rather than the chemical rankness of deep space artificial habitats. He smiled at me, baring his teeth. For every please I utter, there will be a time when you will return them to me tenfold. I rolled my eyes because clearly that's the only logical way to confront an angry werewolf. Is staring and making baseless threats the best you can do? Your Highness. He smiled through clenched teeth. Please. Was he grinding his teeth? Or were his teeth getting longer? The grinding sound stopped. Put me in touch with your superior officer in the United Coalition. Immediately. Please. I turned my back to him. I'll send out a message. Where are your quarters? In tiny transports like these, captains typically gave up their quarters to high-ranking passengers on deep interstellar flights. I usually didn't mind. But the thought that this jerk of a prince would be in my cabin, in my bunk, made me want to punch whoever started that stupid tradition. It wasn't worth it. Diplomatic incident. I threw my head back in my chair and let out a sigh. Behind the cockpit. The blue door on the right. I went back to my screens. His tall reflection remained in the window beyond. The floating grids in front of me. You still haven't told me your name. I tightened my grip on the yoke. Captain. That's not your name. I pulled up a display grid to block his reflection. While we're on my ship. That's what you'll call me. And when we're off the ship? A million light years would pass before I ever got off the ship and went anywhere with him. I wasn't that stupid. Chapter 2. I was on my back with my legs spread wide, wearing nothing but my black underskins. My armor, my constant companion, lay next to me in a dark little brick the length of my forearm. It had to come off in order for me to get into the crawl space. My current ship, the gorgeous Gorgon, or Gigi as we called her, had been mojacked, but it still had the bones of the passenger transport. It was a ship essentially dressed in armor that didn't quite fit. What once had been a solid workaday ship was now prone to tantrums and random outages of important functions if it didn't get a lot of attention. And of course being pursued across interstellar space for millions of light years meant we had plenty of attention to give it. 2 rough and dirty feet appeared in my vision. It was bad enough without my armor, but seeing him so confident while being near naked made me feel even more vulnerable. I was annoyed at myself for feeling this way. It wasn't like I hadn't been in close quarters with plenty of good-looking men during my time in the military, but there was something about the prince that made me feel as if I needed to have all of my defenses up on full alert when dealing with him. If I didn't know better, I would think he was trying to make me uncomfortable. There are shoes in the clothing set we gave you, I said. His feet didn't move. Have you heard from your superiors? We're in a blackout zone. Can't send a message till we get clear. He made a guttural noise that sounded like swearing. It's a matter of life and death. That's what I specialize in. And right now it's yours and your sister's that I'm charged with. That quieted him somehow, but not nearly long enough. He bent down and I could see him peering into the crawl space. I'm sure I was a paragon of beauty. Sprawled on my back, one knee holding up a panel, a couple of picks stuck in my hair, and massive protective goggles on my forehead while trying to re-insulate some wires that had come loose. He tried to get in next to me, but he was too damn big. He settled for sitting cross-legged at my feet, where I now had a perfect view of carved abs and the bulge at his crotch. Apparently, he didn't think the clothes I provided were good enough. All it did was strengthen my resolve. If there was anything I had learned, it was that handsome men were not to be trusted. Impressive looks often came with equally impressive lies. How did you manage to evade not only the satellite defense systems but the entire Tigrantine Space Force? Twice. He understood that it hadn't been easy. Interesting. It's tough to patrol an entire planet. I looked down over my belly to where he squatted between my legs. He looked good down there. Since you've deigned to lower yourself to my level, can you reach into my toolbox and hand me that driver with the orange handle? Oddly enough, he did as I asked, and then he lay down on the floor next to me. I pulled my goggles back on. You must really want my attention. Actually, I decided to rest my back. Goranshit. He wanted to annoy me. He grinned at me. When I truly decide to bring myself to your level, believe me, I will have your attention. Was he trying to flirt with me? I was not going to let my mind wander there. That was where sleeping dragons lay. I went back to what I was doing. He slid closer to me. What was he doing? I tried to ignore him and his Ridiculousness. I think you want to keep soldering the blue wire to the blue one, not to the red one. I looked at what I was doing. Oh, for solar flaring's sake. The only thing to do was to fix it and keep my thoughts off his abs. Have you considered rerouting the spanning chargers through the shield stabilizers? It might cool down the engine core maybe about 10%. There was beauty, and then there was reality, another man telling me how to do my job. Oh, so now you know about the guts of a star serpent. Go on, advise me. Clearly my years of training mean nothing in comparison to the omniscient talents of your high and mighty royalness. While you're at it, why don't you fly the ship too? He reached forward, using huge hands to press back the tangle of wires I was trying to navigate between. Now he was shoulder to shoulder with me, his warm, naked flesh pressing against mine, radiating heat through my underskins. I apologize, Captain. You are a singular pilot. Wait, what? Did he just apologize and compliment me? I tried to focus on the task in front of me, but it was hard when his mouth was so close to my ear. He lowered his voice, his breath warm on my skin. Jean-class ships all have a similar design. I wanted to be a starship engineer when I was a stripling. Memorized all the schematics I could get my hands on. A gearhead. He and Red could probably spend days debating the merits of variable pulse oscillators. The most annoying thing was that he probably had a point. I'm not going to sacrifice mobility like that. Did he lick his lips? You're not afraid to run it fast and hot. I focused on unscrewing and rescreening things for a bit while he watched me. I tried to ignore him, but his gaze was physical, like he was actually touching my skin. What's more, the tool I had asked him for originally wasn't working. I had to force the words out through gritted teeth. Whatever gets the job done. You should consider increasing the heat rate from the core to the ancillary thrusters then. That might compensate for the additional lag from the sorrow fluxer. Are you trying to see how I handle the heat? You're capable, Captain. It's a matter of whether or not you're afraid. A screw dropped on my forehead. I pulled the goggles over my eyes and picked up the soldering iron. I need a pilot like you, he said. I nearly dropped my soldering iron on myself. Soldering clearly wasn't a good idea right now. I put it down and reached across that gorgeous chest of his to snag a pair of pliers. It was like trying to reach over a mountain of muscle. Sorry, not for sale. I wasn't asking. Is that supposed to be a threat? He smiled. When I'm threatening you, you'll know. Yes, you are definitely convincing me to come and work for you. Something slammed into the ship. Alarms blared. I rolled into him and he wrapped himself against me as the hallway rotated around us, bouncing us like an uncontrolled ship in an asteroid field. Good thing I hadn't been soldering. The ship stabilized and he was on top of me. I tried to shove him off, but he was immovable. I gritted my teeth. You like this too much. He grinned. His arms flexed and he propelled himself to his feet. He offered his hand to me. I'm used to being on top. I snagged my exo-armor. It unfolded around me at my touch, encasing me, blocking me from his touch. In my exo-armor I was as strong as he was, maybe even more so. The armor made me feel less vulnerable, more like my usual self. I made my way to the cockpit. Unfortunately, he kept following me. What the stars was that, Red? Blowback from a tracking drone I destroyed. Son of a Guarani stag. Red silenced the disturbing alert with a wave of her hand. Agreed. It knocked out the outer starboard shield. I looked up and took a deep breath. Without the outer hull hiding our power signature and transmission signatures, weapons lock targeting systems would seek us out like scavengers to the dead. We had to find a habitable place to land. I could repair it, but I would actually have to get out and crawl around the outer hull. Gigi, what's the nearest place suitable for landing and repairs? The ship responded with a floating star map. Ashala and Independent. Artificial satellite state aligned with the Tigrantine Protectorate. Nope. Too many pirates there to sell us out. What's the next one? K-7. A habitable planet unsettled by sentient species, 124 light years away. Claimed by the Tigrantine Protectorate. The prince muttered. The stars made it so. I made my decision. Detour to K-7. My people. He stopped in mid-snarl. He suddenly seemed bigger, his teeth inhumanly sharp. He gripped a handhold in the ceiling so tightly I thought he might rip it out. I realized he was so angry he was trying to keep himself from shifting. We just escaped from Altai. No pilot in her right mind would disobey orders and bring you back to enemy space. I left people behind, he said. A knot twisted in my stomach. It was about one of the worst things a soldier could hear. You couldn't leave teammates behind. We need to go back to Altai and get them. I let out a breath, sympathizing. He wasn't trying to dive back in a need for revenge or some other stupid male ego thing. Were they alive? Dead? Being tortured? I had to draw the line. I had to bring the prince and his sister to safety in coalition space. I couldn't risk their lives to rescue random people, even people he valued. I hated that I was complicit in abandoning grunts like myself to enemy claws. But I couldn't do anything about it. He was not my prince and I was not his pilot. The likelihood that the Tigrantines have a planetary defensive system for an uninhabited planet is low. They probably had a few standard issue research bases scattered across the continents in order to maintain their claim. As long as we steer clear of them, we should be fine. There was an angry and human rumbling sound suddenly in the cockpit. He picked up a wrench. Muscles bulged. He started bending it in his hands. I couldn't take my eyes off him and the wrench. All I could think was that I wasn't sure I could do that even in my exo armor. Gigi chimed in. This is a deviation from your prescribed orders. Are you sure? You wish to override? All deviations will be recorded and forwarded to your superior officers for review. Acknowledged. Override Protocol Zeta Thou Alpha. The ship's voice was calm. Acknowledged. Setting new course for K-7. He flung the wrench. It sailed through a floating screen and hit the bulkhead, leaving a dent. The last thing I needed on my ship was an angry werewolf. Please, I said. He turned toward me, his eyes practically glowing with fire. Please, I said again to distract him. Don't give Gigi any more problems than she has. He seemed to intensify before my very eyes. Was he suddenly more muscled? Somehow. I swallowed. Taking him in a fight wouldn't be pleasant. I had to keep talking. And how do you know I didn't need that wrench? He pointed at the bulkhead, the nanomites already flowing to repair the dent. Within moments it would be as good as gone. His voice was several degrees more growly than usual. This is a Star Serpent disguised as a Jean-class ship. That wrench won't work on bolts here. He punched the bulkhead, leaving a deeper dent, then turned and walked out of the cockpit. I looked at my useless wrench on the ground and picked it up. There were claw marks in the metal. I set it back in my toolkit, leaned in the doorway and watched him walk away. The center of the ship was a common area with a small kitchen that could be transformed into a dining, workout, or medical area with a single swipe. Stretched as I walked out of the cockpit and headed for the kitchen. I'd been on shift for hours and it was time to treat myself to some real food, not just the Nutri-bars and liquid meals I usually ate. The princess sat at a large round table, one arm in a cast, eating a meal bar and watching something on the view screen embedded in the table. She had regained some color since the last time I had seen her, but she was still a lighter brown than I was, with a reddish undertone. The medbay had reported her injuries to be serious, but recoverable with time. Other than that, she was clearly a product of fresh air, heavy gravity, and real food that had once lived. Even in her tired, haggard state, she looked as if she could hunt, kill and skin a tiger and carry the carcass home. My job was to obey orders without question. But the dossier on Princess Syria begged for answers. Syria Calix Smith had been a citizen of the United Coalition. Until a couple months ago, she had been a librarian assigned to an out-of-the-way planet famous for cloud surfing. And then a chance DNA screen discovered she was a daughter of the Alpha of Nightclaw, making her a werewolf princess even if she was human. I sat down next to her, swirling hot water into my cup of ready noodles. Your Highness. The princess looked at me with weary eyes. Her fingers tightened around her meal bar. Please don't call me Your Highness. The only people who have called me that lately are those that want to keep me imprisoned. Just Syria. I offered her my hand. Syria then. I'm Sky. Syria crumpled up her meal bar wrapper and shoved it into the garbage chute next to her. Thank you for coming to our aid. I guess that's why I pay my taxes, right? I tried to smile. The coalition doesn't modjack ships for just anyone. She leaned back, as if my statement had deflated her. I know. She took a deep breath. What does your dossier tell you about me? I know they must have given you one before you took the mission. You never knew what librarians knew. I poked at my noodles with my chopsticks, waiting for them to soften. A story that seems like it could have only come from a vid. The whole me being a werewolf princess thing? That's something I never even fathomed in my craziest dreams. You can't help who your biological father is. Believe me, I would know. Slurped my noodles loudly, trying to be as polite and appreciative of the salty spicy broth as my mother had taught. No. And I always wondered. Her voice died, her lips tightening. She took a breath. I never fathomed he would be such a crazy son of a bitch. There is no way I am ever putting myself in his territory again. He didn't treat you well? He treated me like a human fairy saga princess. A delicate, brainless creature incapable of protecting herself or her virtue from the evil tiger shifters that lurk in the night. Even though he knew I was a librarian. Librarians trained at the Universal Archives were tough bitches, dedicated to protecting, preserving, and retrieving knowledge. Some of them ventured into places no one in their right mind would ever go. I took her hands in mine. Training ops rule number 2. Touch instills trust. It's okay. I know what it's like to be away from friends and family for months and years at a time. All too well. I can't wait to get back to my place on Sanchun, she said. How could I tell her that she probably wasn't going to ever see her home again? That I was going to take her back to her father, the very person she had been running from? I put Syria's hands down and picked up my noodles. The thought sickened me. Couldn't imagine being forced to live with my space pirate father. But orders were orders. I slurped up some more noodles, then paused to wipe my mouth. Did the tigers mistreat you? No, actually. The commander of the teeth was someone who Ral had previously captured and ransomed back. Ral had been ordered to execute all commandos, but he refused. The commander told me Ral said he didn't butcher soldiers ordered to do their jobs. His Highness refused an order of his alpha? Isn't that usually punishable by death or extreme torture? I get the feeling that he does that a lot. He said his conscience is more important than orders. I see. Well, he had the privilege of making those judgments and acting on them. Soldiers like me didn't. Syria gave me an appraising look. You know, he uses the word please with you. That's not something a wolf does to anyone. In Ral's culture there is a command and you obey. You only ask and thank those who are close to you, or those with whom you want to be close. Had he said please without threatening me? I couldn't remember. If he does. I forced him into it. How do you know so much about the prince if you only recently met him? Being imprisoned in a room with nothing to do will let you get to know each other pretty well. If I learned anything, I learned no one forces Ral to do anything, not even the alpha. Ral does what he wants. The prince's voice interrupted us. Nobody really cares what the third son does. I was not going to react to his voice and look at him. I stared down into my noodles. Syria's voice took an exasperated edge, as if she'd had this conversation before. I'm the fourth and only half werewolf. I can't even change. So why does everyone care so much about me? I don't want to be involved in werewolf politics. Ral's voice was as calm as if he were explaining difficult concepts to a child. It doesn't matter what you want. The obligations and duties are the same. I'm still a citizen of the coalition. She wasn't. At the Alpha's request, the coalition had revoked Syria's citizenship. I didn't even know that could be done. I shoved the thought aside. I would take them to the remains of Dragonbelt at the edge of the known galaxy if that's what it took to get back in my Starbolt. Ral sat down next to her. You're blind if you think you can go back to San Chun, Syria. Why can't I? This is a coalition ship heading for coalition space. It was my cue to leave. I stood up. She looked at me. Isn't it? Ral's steady gaze trapped me. For a moment I felt frozen. But my training kicked in and I broke free with a forced smile. I lightened my voice. Of course. We'll have you back where you belong in no time. Chapter 3. The orbital defenses around K-7 were the most advanced weaponry money could buy. Thousands of silvery drone spheres circled the planet, each one capable of frying our ship into microatoms in less time than it took to blink. The funding, the research, the calculations it took to create and deploy such systems on a wide scale was staggering. And yet it was completely ridiculous. I started laughing as I put in the appropriate calculations. It wasn't just ridiculous but completely absurd. What's so funny? Asked the prince from behind, startling me. I glanced at him and quickly looked back at the screen. Any empire can buy an orbital defense system, but it takes real idiots to leave them set on the factory default algorithm. He somehow folded his massive bulk into the co-pilot chair next to me. Normally, non-coalition citizens weren't allowed in here, but I figured it was better to keep him where I could see him. At least he was wearing a shirt this time, even if it was so tight on him it was like he didn't have anything on at all. Which means the cockpit was too small and he was too close. You're supposed to replace the algorithm with one of your own once you deploy them. The Tigrantines didn't. You sure it's not a trap? It could be. But when you have a multi-level bureaucracy ruling planets across multiple systems, no? And military bureaucracies are the worst. All we have to do is wait and fly in when there's an opening, which should be coming about now. I pulled back on the yoke and we picked up speed towards the planet. The seat hummed as the prince adjusted it to his size. I need access to the stellar webs and a comm line as well. I granted him a floating screen. Stellar web access I can do, but I'm under orders to notify you that all transmissions from this ship can and will be read by coalition censors who will have the final say on what contents will be passed on to their destination. I wouldn't expect anything less. So, do all unified coalition pilots study the schematics of off-the-shelf orbital defenses? Or just starbolt pilots? I had to reach past him to grab the screen floating on the other side of him. Was there a way I could do it and avoid physical contact? It makes sense to know your enemy. His fingers drummed the armrest. I think a dissertation is more than knowing your enemy. He actually looked through the old-fashioned volumes on the little shelf in my quarters. In an act of sheer extravagance, my sister had given me an expensive, printed and bound copy of my dissertation as a gift when I graduated. It was a nod to the physical books I had on board to read sometimes when I had to make the ship's electronic signature dark. His fingers kept drumming the armrest. I watched them dangerously, wondering what they would feel like against my skin. I found the footnotes quite interesting, especially your idea about doubling the coils on a pulsar ion drive and insulating it with frezane gas. Has the coalition adopted this method? How did he know anything about starship engines? Another alert reminded me I needed that screen on the other side of him. I could ask him to pass me that screen, but then it would ask him if he should have access and I would have to deny him access, which would probably lead to another argument. No choice but to initiate physical contact. I reached across him, brushing against his muscled arms. I hated how aware I was of exactly where his shirt and my skin touched. No, I said. A steady supply of frezane gas is too expensive. He watched me tap my screens quietly for several moments. I knew what I was doing, but I hated that I felt so self-aware with him watching me. I knew what this was about. He thought he could seduce me into obeying his desires. That, and the fact that he had broken out of prison meant he was intent on letting out some sexual frustration. It wouldn't be such a bad idea if he wasn't such a domineering jerk. And if this wasn't a mission that my career rested on, was not going to risk my starbolt for anything, especially not with him. He sat there watching me for several moments with me ignoring him. I had almost succeeded in forgetting he was there, but then he started talking again. I studied everything I could on deep space engines up until a couple years ago when Alpha told me I was needed with our ground forces. Was he trying to establish how much more he knew about this ship than I did? That was the wrong way to get into my exo-armor. I seized on politics, a topic designed to turn friends into enemies. When are werewolves not at war with each other? Coalition troops have been on Alzerfor for more than a decade now. There was a flare of something inhuman in his eyes. It's going to end soon. I'll make sure of that. I snorted. Did he really believe he could change the patterns of hundreds of years of clashes and conflicts? I looked over at him, his eyes intent at the screen. He looked every bit the warrior prince he was. But making peace required more than looking determined. He exhaled. The houses that don't believe in interstellar contact and trade are almost gone. We're close to establishing a unified planet. And once that's done, we'll be better prepared to deal with future threats. The blood drained from my face. If he was saying the galactic peace wasn't going to last, then the peace was almost definitely not going to last. Like the Protectorate. It's only a matter of time before the tigers turn their full attention to us. Again, despite our shared origins, I'm not going to sit back and let my planet be turned into a colony. And now, just like that, the 200-year peace was going to end. I gripped the yoke a little more tightly. Is that what the war on Alzur is about? I have to make sure our people are protected from all threats. And of course, taking your unwilling sister back to your father is part of it. It's the price of being a princess of Nightclaw. There is no freedom for anyone if we are slaves to the tigers. It was too high a price if you ask me, but then I was just another pilot. He didn't respond. Then, in a voice almost too low for me to hear, I helped her escape. I kept my gaze focused ahead. I was told you were tracking her down. He opened a small view screen in front of him, one that tracked our ship's progress across the system. I was trying to give her time to escape, to escort her somewhere she would have the freedom to be safe. A screen showed a group of asteroids coming within range. I opened another screen and began calculating course adjustments. I thought defying an alpha was punished rather severely. He tapped on the screen, examining the list of floating cities, habitable planets, and other nearby way stations. My father will forgive my mistakes. The rule of flying in deep space was to occasionally update yourself on where you were in the event of an emergency evacuation. It was always important to know the location of the nearest habited space. I tapped another display and made sure the list would appear in the princess's quarters. Must be nice to be the favored son. I'll still be punished when we return. He won't help me get my people out of there. I have to go back. I shouldn't ask. How many did you leave behind? There was no reaction, no movement, no change in expression, and yet something tense between us all the same. 3, he said finally in a grim voice. Weight was a serious consideration on deep space vessels that non-pilots often thought was a non-issue. I sighed. I can recommend pilots that might be able to help you once we arrive at Chandrayan Station. He leaned on my armrest, invading my space with that alpha trick again. What will it take for you to help me? His mouth was too close to my ear, his voice too intimate, but I couldn't move away from him. It would show too much weakness. You know unusual things about space engines, so I'm guessing you at least know how to fly deep space. He grabbed my other armrest, spun me to face him, his eyes with an interested gleam. I can do deep. I put my feet on the ground and moved my chair back. The Starbolt is like nothing you've ever flown before. It's a fighter pilot's dream. Fast, deadly, and responsive as a mind-reading lover. When you fly a Starbolt, it's like you could take on everyone in the universe on your own. You're unstoppable. I've fought my whole life to be the pilot of a Starbolt. Once this mission is complete, I'll get mine back. Short of the next generation of Starbolt class fighter, there's nothing you can offer. He was quiet for a moment. We'll see. Hours later, I watched on screen as the planet grew closer. With blue skies, salty oceans, and vast rainforests at the equator, K-7 looked more like first Earth than other more inhabited planets. Why had this planet not been settled? I ran a quick search on K-7, but the coalition didn't have much. It had never been contested and had always been pretty firmly claimed by the Tigrantines. Ral returned to the cockpit. Where he had gone earlier I didn't know and, frankly, didn't care. Or so I kept telling myself. We have to avoid the Tigrantine bases, which shouldn't be too hard to do. There are 4 of them. Do you have an idea of how many tigers are usually stationed on a base? I had to think about it. This was a question that ground troopers would know. In their sleep. About 5,000. He nodded. 20,000 soldiers is a lot to send to an uninhabited planet. As not just the soldiers, it's the support, the infrastructure, the expense. That's not something you do for any rock in space. They're up to something. I let out a sigh. Let me guess. You want to divert course to investigate. If the princess were not on this ship, yes. But we can't risk her safety. When you leave the ship to complete your repairs, I will come with you. You need protection. If I were a man, this conversation wouldn't be happening. He made some wolf-like growl. You're not a shifter. I didn't know if speciesism was worse than sexism. I guarantee you I can take care of myself. Nonetheless, I am coming with you. Clearly saving his life didn't mean a damn. Don't you have an injured sister to take care of? I am taking care of her. Our best chance of getting to safety is to make sure our pilot is not attacked or eaten by strange alien beasts. As long as my sister remains on the ship, she will be safe. The only danger I was in was of hurting this idiot and causing an international galactic incident that would almost certainly lead to a court-martial. If Ral got attacked, it would be on my record. Although after watching him take on 6 tigers alone, I was fairly certain he would be able to handle himself. I looked at him, taking in his once again shirtless form. It was a matter of math. He was eye-catching because his musculature was so deliciously symmetrical. Fucking math. I sighed. Fine, come along. Make sure you're actually wearing clothing. I could hear the grin in his voice. Does my lack of clothing make you nervous? No. Just don't want to have to explain how your precious royalness died from alien plant poisoning because he was too stupid to wear a shirt. My faceplate shielded my eyes, but I still needed to adjust the dimming function to the overly bright sun of K-7. It had been a while since I had been on any habitable planet that actually had plants, let alone an actual unharvested forest. Most of my work was based out of the artificial floating space cities or on freestanding military space stations. Something fell on my arm and I nearly jumped halfway to one of the 2 moons. I looked again. A leaf. It had fallen. Yep, this was foreign territory for me. K-7 may have looked like first Earth, but the higher level gravity was a force to contend with. Without my exo-armor, I would feel twice as heavy as I actually was, which would make me feel like I was swimming and breathing Quantarian exhaust. In my exo-armor, it wasn't an issue. Could run kilometers, lift air cars and punch a hole through star steel walls. Ral practically gambled out of the ship after me, wearing nothing but an ordinary military-grade jumpsuit, adjusting to the high gravity without a problem. Then again, Alzerver, the home of the werewolves, was also a high-gravity planet. He went past me, jogging around the clearing, taking in the scent and shape of the alien world. It was ridiculous how he even managed to make that awful military-grade jumpsuit look not only good but dangerous. The man could probably wear nothing but a loincloth and still be threatening. Goosebumps sprang up all over my skin at that thought. I hastily buried that rather distracting image deep in my mind. He came to stand next to me. I turned to face the ship. It towered over me as tall as a 3-level building. For the most part, star serpents were typically functional and sturdy spaceships, but they always looked like they'd flown through a dump with a magnet. I looked up, trying to figure out a good place to work beyond the various protrusions and dents, and spotted a large flat area to the rear. Yes, that would do. I paused and my old fear of heights punched me in the chest once more. Yeah, I had heard all the jokes in the academy, a pilot being afraid of heights, but flying in the vastness of space was different than teetering over the edge of some flimsy structure so far from the ground. Are you all right? Fine. I'd have been better if he hadn't been standing next to me. I took a breath and jumped. I looked up again, noticing an access ledge midway between the ground and Gigi's topside. I could grab that if I fell. I caught the topside edge and scrambled on top of the ship, something that would have been impossible without my exo-armor. I lay back on the roof, looking up at the sky for several moments. He stood above me. He must have jumped up almost exactly as I had, only without exo-armor, probably more gracefully. He grinned. Don't tell me you're afraid of heights, Captain. I made myself get up, or rather, ordered my exo-armor to move me upwards. Focus on the task at hand. We have a job to do. I picked a pry bar out of my kit and walked towards the tail end, then jammed it into a seam on the starboard side. Shouldn't you be keeping watch, making sure nothing is going to come attacking out of the bushes? Your ship has better senses than I do, and will alert you faster than I could. Congratulations for finally realizing that. What is the point of you being out here? He gave me a smirk that had no right to be so sexy. I didn't know it was possible for me to want to fuck and hit someone at the same time. I wanted to see what you are doing. Yes, an audience was what I needed because it helped me fix things so nicely last time. Clearly his secret motive was to annoy the hell out of me. Did he take management lessons at the University of You Must Obey or else harass you to death? Why do you care? Why do you think I don't? Still not going to look at him. Because you're an arrogant, handsome son of a bitch who expects your every desire fulfilled immediately. Oh no. Did I really tell him he was handsome? Well, it wasn't something he didn't already. No. I could see him smiling out of the corner of my eyes. Couldn't give him the satisfaction of looking at him. I'm not used to having my requests denied. Spoiled prince. There's a first time for everything. His words echoed in my head, and then I realized it wasn't the words that were echoing. Everything else in the forest had gone completely silent. My exo-armor crackled with electricity, a defensive response to my sudden weariness. And then something massive, white, furry, and full of sharp teeth rushed us. Ral shoved himself in front of me and leaped for the monster. The two fell off the roof of the ship. I scrambled to the edge and saw a massive white wolf circling the thing. If I didn't know better, I would say it was a tiger shifter. It was certainly as big, fast, and strong as a tiger shifter, but its movements were oddly hitched. It circled Ral's white wolf form silently, even as Ral growled at the thing. And it had no heat signature. No wonder the damn ship didn't sense it. Computers' new targets have no heat signature track based on motion and speed. Multiple targets bubbled into existence in my vision. 2 more leapt from the trees. I fired. It exploded in a burst of light, but the second one dodged. With a single paw swipe, it knocked me off the roof, fell hitting the ground hard. I tried to get up, but the thing leapt on top of me. Teeth the length of my forearms crunched around my face, darkening my vision. The visor held, but the alerts beeped as the bar showing my suit's protective level shrank. I struggled, but even the exo-armor's added strength couldn't combat the speed with which the tiger was shaking me. Its jaws clenched on my helmet, flinging me around, trying to dislodge my head from my body. Rationally, I knew the exo-armor had been through far worse, but sometimes mind-shrieking fear is the only logical response. With great effort, I jammed my fingers in the things. Power crackled through the outer layers of my armor, blasting the tiger off of me. Relief rocked me as I fought off the edge of adrenaline-based queasiness. My helmet signaled more incoming. No time to be sick. I looked around and jumped back up to the roof of the ship to get a better vantage point. Scrambled over to the opposite edge of the ship. The prince was still circling the tiger. I could barely catch my breath to yell at him. Hey Highness, are you done flirting yet? Another target appeared in my screen. I fired into the trees. Something massive fell to the ground. The tiger circled. The wolf dodged, twisted, and clamped his jaws on the tiger's neck and bit down. A crack echoed through the forest. He sprung up and leapt back onto the roof of the ship. I turned to fire at another target up in the tree canopy. What the hell are these things? The prince had shifted when my back was turned. Don't know, but they sure as hell don't smell like tigers. They stink of the dead. They're not moving like they're dead. Captain, came Red's voice over our comlink. Something has short-circuited the local artillery. We can't fire on the tigers without compromising the shield. Check the starboard weapons regrader. Can they get in? No. Good. Stay in the ship with the princess. Ral had picked up my soldering iron and was holding it out like a sword. See? Now, aren't you glad I'm out here? Zombie tiger shifters, a broken-down starship, and a prince who doesn't know. He's not in charge. What more could a girl want? His reply was muffled when another tiger knocked him off the ship. I started soldering as fast as I could. Mute all sounds save for immediate threats and requests for assistance. The noise of battle faded away and I concentrated on manipulating the wires and the screws. When I had finished, I saw Ral on the ground, stalking back toward the ship. Naked. Shifting had torn his clothing to shreds, and yes, he was big all over. He was filthy, dirty, and had no right to be that sexy after a fight. He said something and I realized I still had him on mute. Maybe I should keep the suit on all the time. Restore sound. Going to go investigate. He leapt off the ship and disappeared into the forest. What? Replay conversation, I said out loud. The helmet played back his voice. The wind shifted. There's a strange smell to this place. I'm going to go investigate. The fuck was he doing? Red, is everything working now? The sound of Red's voice crackled momentarily. Yes, everything is working. Where did the prince go? I have no idea. Red snickered. Maybe you should put a tracking collar on him, Captain. I scanned the direction he disappeared in. There was something weird about the plant life that screwed with my sensors, so I had no idea where he was or how far he was. With my luck, it was probably sentient flesh-eating flowers, the kind that actually moved. Or worse, flying sentient flesh-eating flowers. A breeze rustled the vine-like tubes, which rubbed against each other in odd Haunting whistles. I watched the horizon. Stars hit in a noodle dick I could have flied and died in. 2 dogfights by now. Where was he? I walked to the edge of the roof, looked down at the ground where the bodies of the not tiger shifter things laid. Should I go looking for him? But then if I got eaten, that left Red to get the princess home. Red was a good pilot, but she was fresh meat just out of flight school. She got assigned to me to learn the ropes. Something cracked and I spun, charging up my rifle. Ral cradled a body much too small to be covered in that much blood. The look on his face was fury incarnate. The tiger shifters are experimenting on their own children. Ral ended up bringing a total of 5 children to the ship. According to the Medbot scans, their ages ranged from 6 to 11. They were filthy, emaciated and covered with scars. Neither Red nor I had any fluency in Tigerese beyond asking for the bathroom, so it was up to Ral and Syria, who both spoke it fluently. With Ral, the kids were almost mute, but for some reason they opened up to Syria. After speaking with them at length, Syria drew herself up, anger and tears in her eyes. There were more, but they're dead. These 5 were left behind to survive on their own. Red shook her head. That makes no sense. They're trying to breed super soldiers, said Ral. Despite their emaciated status, the children's bones and muscles were 3 times as dense as any ordinary shifter, which meant that despite looking like skin and bones, each one weighed as much as a fully grown human. Ral shook his head. We had some intel that the tigers were disappearing dissident families and families with crossbloods. Fuck. The Star Serpent had been modified to carry 5 adult passengers, including me and Red. I rubbed my forehead. Any more weight would compromise flight integrity. That could mean the difference between capture and escape, or life and death if the tigers got our scent again. Red, cradling a kid in tiger form, knew what I was about to ask. Could we take the kids? Yes. Would we be able to jump? No. Without hyperjump capability, we'd have to rely on access to wormholes in heavily guarded spaces. Not the best option, to say the least. There's got to be something we can dump. We can't leave them here. Ral raised an eyebrow. Not enough to make a difference for the kids. I took a deep breath and stared at the ship above me. What could we sacrifice in order to get this thing off the ground? I looked at Ral, still shirtless as ever, but thankfully wearing pants. He was devastating when he was naked. Red, how much weight could we take if we removed the outer hull shielding? There was silence. Captain, you can't be serious. That's like walking naked into a tiger pit, said Ral. This was my decision. Red would follow orders. I wasn't so sure about Ral or his sister. I faced him. You, Your Highness, would be fine walking naked into a tiger pit. He gave me a very confident grin. Your point is, Captain? You've seen what I can do. I can get us out of here without the tigers even knowing we exist. I haven't taken a direct hit on my hull since flight school. We'll still have the electroshield generator to protect us from long-range attacks. Red pressed forward. Captain, stripping the ship of its primary armor is going to put us all at risk of radiation poisoning. We'd have to stop somewhere and either switch ships or somehow get another hull well before we get to Coalition space. Without a hull, we couldn't enter any planet's atmosphere. We'd have to make a stop at either a space station or, more likely, one of the independent floating cities, each of which were filled with space pirates who would sell us out at hyperspeed. We wouldn't have to take off all of the shielding, I said. No, but you'd have to take off most of it, replied Red. Why not leave me behind? I can stay. I would survive, said Ral. His words surprised me. I didn't know of very many who would risk their lives for their enemies, even if they were only children. The wolves and the tigers had been at war, and not quite war, ever since humanity discovered their kin among the stars. I don't know what they did to these kids. Red's a junior pilot with no experience in dealing with children, let alone ones that transform into super-powered killing machines. Your sister can't handle them alone. I need you to help keep everyone safe in the close confines of the ship. He was silent. I'm the captain of this ship, so I've heard. This decision is mine. I matched his gaze. But I need to know you're on board. Are you giving me a choice? I can save you and your sister. I can save the children. But you need to trust me. Something odd flickered in his eyes. I was expecting him to argue with me. To my surprise, he said, I'd walk into a tiger pit naked with you. There was something else underneath those words, trust and other things I didn't have time to unpack. I nodded at him. He saluted me. He fucking saluted me. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Red, start powering down the outer hull. Redirect that power to the engines. But Captain. Do it, Red. Yes, ma'am. Rao grabbed my hand. Your name, Captain. You already know it. You're living in my quarters. He moved closer to me, so close I could see a tiny hidden braid tied back in his white hair. I want you to tell me yourself. Sky. My name tumbled out. Sky Daring. No, I had to remember who I really was. Captain Sky Daring of the United Coalition Forces. I was a soldier, a pilot, and not someone who had any right to even want a werewolf prince. He released my arm. Sky, he said, somehow looking as if his tongue was licking my name. How fitting. I turned my back to him and walked away. It's still Captain to you. Chapter 4. In the process of trying to escape from tiger shifter zombies, I started thinking of the prince as Ral, rather than His Highness. I knew this kind of thinking was dangerous, like flying into a fight with cold weapons dangerous. Fighting together against a common undead enemy that was trying to eat your brains undoubtedly created a simulation of closeness. I shouldn't let him have a name, shouldn't let him be a person, because then I might actually start to like him. And at the end of the path was a black hole, even I'd have trouble escaping. I had to admit though, he was efficient at lifting heavy sheets of metal, shielding off the ship and hauling them off into a pile by himself, and with those muscles rippling, that sweat rolling down his back and chest, he looked all too good doing it. Even wearing powered exo-armor, the job should have taken at least a day because of how heavy the damn shielding was. With Ral it took 3 hours. What made it worse was that oddly enough he wasn't being such a pain in the ass about it. He nodded when I told him where to put the shielding and went to work. The final piece of mottled blue-green metal was the size of an air truck. A piece of metal that seemed designed to crush someone into the ground. He lifted it, hauling the thing atop his shoulders, lifting with his knees, and carefully carried it over to the pile of scrap metal, the weight of his load forcing deep footprints in the damp ground. He had some poppin' abs. I had to stop watching him. I turned my attention back to the Star Serpent. It looked vulnerable and naked. The ship wasn't programmed with an AI, but I still felt for it. Remember how it was to be unprotected without exo-armor. It was in part why I knew I belonged in the military. Military-grade exo-armor like mine was not only extremely expensive but highly restricted. As a civilian, even if I had the credits, I still wouldn't be able to obtain a suit on my own, especially not like this one. Now any stray space garbage could rip through the thin skin of the ship. We jumped through a wormhole with a rip. The stresses would tear it to pieces. Actually, if I came in too hot on a planet with an atmosphere, that would probably break the ship open too. I didn't like the odds, but we didn't have a choice. We weren't going to leave those kids behind. Ral thrust the massive piece of shielding into the ground, creating a barrier for a makeshift yard. Initially, when he brought up the idea, I had been against it. Ral pointed out that the kids had survived on their own for months, with the tiger zombies hunting them. I was about to get in his face until Red showed me she could create a small protective field bubble outside the ship. She also reprogrammed the weapon sensors to track for speed and motion rather than heat, and deployed a few hovering drone mines. If the tiger shifter zombies came back, the ship's auto-targeting would eliminate them, or at least give us enough warning to take care of them. With a little coaxing and food, the kids opened up. Not to me, of course, but Ral and Syria. Maybe it was a shifter thing. All Syria had to do was give them a firm look, and you never saw such sad oh shit disappointed her faces. But as for Red and I, the kids didn't quite know what to make of us. When they thought we weren't looking, they kept sneaking close, sniffing us, and then running away. At some point I asked Ral about it. You and Red are the first non-shifters they've ever seen. They're afraid it's contagious. There was a yowl, followed by a crash and more screams. Syria's sharp warning whistle cut through the air. Silence followed. Ral jammed the shielding further down into the dirt. Teaching children is a matter of drawing boundaries and being firm and consistent. I'm surprised the kids actually respect you, considering the natural enmity between tigers and wolves. He gave a test shove at the shield wall. Natural enmity? You've been watching too many First Earth vids. Human media likes to make the tension between wolves and tigers as a racial thing. But it's not. What is it then? Power, territory, and the ability to live out your life as you see fit, he said, in between grunting and digging the piece of metal into the ground. The same thing humans have always fought over, even before they reached the stars. There are wolves on Altai and there are tigers on Alzarfor. There are tigers in the House of Nightclaw. Crossbloods are everywhere. He stood up, his muscles flexing as he wiped the sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand. Ral looked at me. Things are not always as sharp and clear as you humans make it out to be. He was looking at me, challenging me for a response. I patched Red's calm. Bring out the kids. Within seconds the tiger kids streamed out, screaming at the top of their lungs. They were prone to biting when stressed, which wouldn't have been so bad if they stayed in human form. They were actually kind of cute in tiger form, but the sharp claws and super strength made that dangerous on our passenger transport, even if it was a military-grade ship. One tussle between the kids had nearly taken out one of the emergency escape pods. No amount of admonition from Red had any effect, but after Ral gave them a low growl, all were quiet for several hours. Ral let loose with a sound that made one kid lose control of his bladder. No one was about to try any more shifting or biting on the ship after that, at least while the wolves were around. They surrounded Ral and begged him to chase them. You're the monster, one high-pitched girl squealed, my exo-armor translating her words. You have to catch us. Ral's hand shifted to monster-like claws and he ran after her. Despite the gruesome sight of his hands, the sight of him playing with those kids twisted me inside in an odd way. I knew the life I planned on living had no room for children, but there was a deep primal part of me that ached for that kind of life and love, even as I knew it wouldn't work. I turned to go back inside. Red was prepping the common area to enable it to secure the kids in transit. Frizzled strands escaped from the dark single braid in her hair. She still wasn't enthralled with the idea of removing the ship's shielding, but she carried out her orders anyway. Any more crazy ideas, like dismantling the drone deployers to save the rest of the universe while we're at it? Said Red, drilling extra straps into the bulkhead. We had so little space on the ship we had resorted to creating additional restraints in the common area. I had to give up my crew bunk to two of the girls. Now I shared my bed in my own quarters with Ral, via alternating shifts. It wouldn't be so bad if he didn't leave the sheets smelling so damn good. We're doing the right thing here, I said with a confidence I didn't feel. Red put down the drill. Her eyes flickered to the open bay door. We're not really going to return Syria back to her father, are we? This conversation had been coming. Red and her mother had lived in hiding from an abusive father for years. I knew where her sympathies would lie. They were where mine lay too. Unfortunately, we didn't have the luxury of acting on them. I couldn't look at her. I picked up the drill. You know what we have to do. She turned her back on me, paced a few steps and then back. Yes, but I don't have to like it. We have to do what we have to do to complete the mission. Unless someone catches up with us or we have to halt for repairs, we are to proceed as planned, Lieutenant. She gave me a level look. I understand, Captain. An alert beeped and a screen appeared in front of us, displaying a problem in the engine room. Red punched the bulkhead in frustration. Remind me next time. That messing with other people's hacks is among my least favorite things to do. I have to show you what those idiots back on base did to the engine. As we walked over to the engine room, Red launched into a tirade about the amoebic intelligence of the Section 9 Black Ops mechs. Like I hadn't already heard her opinion 18 times this month alone. I knew my way around most military-grade flight engines. Red, however, was one of those inventor-engineer pilots you could imagine building hyperjump engines with nothing more than rocks, sand, and one of those derelict alien ships you sometimes found drifting around. After listening to her vent, I held my hands up. Okay, I get it. The engine is in imminent danger of falling apart if we enter a wormhole the wrong way. Or if we jump. It would have been fine if they hadn't vented the coolant through the plasma ionizer. I rubbed the palm of my hand against my forehead. If we put sudden stresses on the engine core, it might explode. Like a firefight or a hyperspace jump. Red ran a hand underneath the tank, pulled out a coiled wire attached to a slab of blinking purple lights. See what I'm talking about? This Vericeptor shouldn't even be here. Best case nothing goes wrong, worst case. She pushed her hands out, simulating a massive explosion. So I'm going to have to be here, physically monitoring the starfucked core myself. Solo is my normal mode. Ral startled me with his voice. I can fly co-pilot. Stop sneaking around. I was suddenly aware of an eerie lack of noise. Wait. Why is it so quiet? The kids are having a snack in the common room. Eating makes them silent. And I'm not sneaking. You don't listen. I appreciate the offer, Your Highness, but this isn't your standard ship. I've flown in the Endurance Quint-Click race on Freon 7. That was one of the most well-known starship races in the galaxy. Fast, dangerous, and deadly. If he survived that, he would have the reflexes and, more importantly, for a shifter control. Shifter pilots tended to get bitey and furry when engines got hot and bothered. Part of me suddenly wondered why that didn't happen during sex. Then the rest of me realized I shouldn't be letting myself go there. Obeying orders wouldn't come easy. I took a page from Ralph's dominant shifter trick book and walked into his space. Of course it worked better for him since he was so much taller than me. You have problems taking orders, and I won't tolerate anything less than obedience in my cockpit. Ral looked down at me, something in his eyes I didn't want to name. Afraid. You can't handle me. No, I'm afraid you'll hesitate and get us all killed. He leaned even closer to me, knowing exactly what I was doing. Demand my obedience and I'll be yours, Captain. I looked him up and down, slowly refusing to back away. Even his submission was a challenge. I met his gaze. I look forward to your service, Your Highness. Red rolled her eyes and pushed past us. Oh, go get a room for Star's sake. I clenched my fists. Nothing was happening between us. Nothing. We waited until nightfall to avoid the drones that occasionally tracked overhead. We were crammed full with kids strapped in the common area crew bunks in our quarters. The princess was in her cabin. Red was prepped in the engine area, ready to jump on any malfunctions that might happen, which meant that Ral was in the cockpit with me. This time he was wearing a shirt, a sleeveless one that framed those distracting shoulders and massive biceps all too well. The algorithm of K-7's orbital defense systems had modified itself, right? On schedule. We had to fly out at what seemed like a stroll-in-the-park pace to avoid the speed detectors, because nothing was more relaxing than leisurely soaring off a hostile planet into enemy space. I could feel his gaze on me as I switched between screens. So you've done this before, I take it, he said. No. Why? Are you afraid? Should I be? You should be cautious. I am. As we cleared the atmosphere, I saw a golden spark near the horizon, right? Where it shouldn't be. The Tigers must be trying to fly staggered patrols. Red, prep the engine for jump. We've got comet killers heading our way. Estimated time to contact, 4 minutes. I'm not sure the core will make it for a jump. How far is the nearest wormhole? Asked Red. Things were desperate. There were 2 ways to engage in faster than light travel. A jump engine or going through ancient alien portals. In space, the wormholes were named after the extinct spacefaring leviathans. That made them. It was about as much fun going through them as it sounded. Human-based life forms weren't meant to travel through them, but it was better than death. I checked the screen, entered a quick calculation. 10 minutes without intercept. Make sure the engine doesn't explode. I'll get us to the wormhole. I took a deep breath. Red dots rose on from the screens surrounding us like blood-sucking insects from stagnant water. Only way to go was away from the planet. Here we go, I said to myself. Without the outer hull there were no more dumb avian games. This would be as much of a straight shot as I could make it. He made a rumbling wolf noise. Command me, Captain. Drop the mini drones. Fire when targets in range. Take out as many as you can. More and more dots peppered our screens, signaling more fighters. Why did the Tigers have so many fighters for an uninhabited planet of no strategic value? The flashes on the horizon resembled the lights of deep space emergency beacons. I veered the ship starboard into a corkscrew. The stars spun around us. The first comet killer and wingship came within range. Ral used one drone to slice off the wing of a fighter. Another drone hooked onto another fighter and nulled it with a localized EMP burst. 2 more came within range and Ral managed to hit them both. Not bad. Who knew a prince could obey so well? I punched the drive engines to the next level. The wormhole was too damn far away. I dropped more drones in our wake. At this rate, we'd be out of them before we got to the wormhole. He took out 3 more targets. I strive only for your pleasure, Captain. I laughed like a junkie snorting happy gas. It was like he was at a shooting range and they were lining up targets on cue. Well, maybe a shooting range. That kept accelerating and spinning around at near light speeds. You've got some experience. I saw his screen out of the corner of my eye. Target acquired. Target down. Target acquired. Target down. He was like a machine, only better. He had to have some precog ability to predict the future. People like him were why nobody used AI targeting computers. The unpredictability of human error and action made them near useless. I have many talents. Would you like me to show you sometime? Pass, I said, hoping he wouldn't hear the lie in my voice. Another alert beeped. 7 fighters on intercept, 2 below, 2 behind us, and 2 in front and 1 above us. His voice dropped sexily. How about now? He tapped on the screen. 1 by 1, drones he had dropped previously exploded, each perfectly timed. Now there were none. That wasn't normal. Not even for a Starbolt pilot. My jaw dropped. The chances of that were infinitesimal. He grinned at me. Impressed. He had to be a precog. No wonder he knew exactly how to push my buttons. If you can shoot like this, I yelled at him. Why the hell do you need me to help rescue your crew? Ralph's voice remained calm. Targeting is one thing. Flying is another. Red's voice came over the comm. Try not to use the starboard lasers. That's not going to be easy, said Ral. I fired upon one of the Tiger drones with the rear ion gun. It exploded into a multitude of flying deadly shards of shrapnel, each capable of piercing our hull. I had to change course. Surely you're up for the challenge? The stars spun around us. With you by my side, Captain, we could conquer the galaxy. Right now, I'll settle for the damn wormhole. We're going to have to make it fast and hard. The engine is hot. Are you ready? Don't keep me waiting. I put everything into the core engines and shoved a final burst. We ejaculated missiles and lasers as we spun fast and hard for the swirling hole of light. As we entered the event horizon of the wormhole, every fiber of my being felt as if it were being set on fire and stretched. I screamed. New constellations appeared all around us. The screens, the alerts were all silent. I had fucking done it. I had flown free of planetary orbital defense systems and a squadron of comet killers essentially fucking naked. I let out a scream, punched the air, and then promptly slumped into my seat. My heart was pounding so fast it felt like it was almost outside of my chest. I flipped the gravity back on and felt reality settle back into my bones. Red, can you check on the princess and the kids? They're fine. Ral looked at me with hungry wolf eyes. An unwanted heat as welcome as a lick of flame to an oil slick near a fusion core engine ignited within me. He grinned. That was a crazy etched piece of flying. I shivered. I tried to ignore how coiled he seemed, as if he were waiting for the right moment to spring. Thanks. You certainly got over your queasiness. His seat safety released him with a hiss. It takes some getting used to. He stood up and stretched, delicious muscles flexing. He loomed over me and it felt as if he were stealing all the space and oxygen in the cockpit. I was hot and lightheaded. It was the aftermath of adrenaline and near death still racing through my system, trying to manifest itself as desire. Fuck if I would let it. Precog. His voice was so calm, so casual. A minor bit. Can't see the future, can't predict an opponent's moves in a fight, but I can find targets with long distance weapons. He looked at me with those wolf eyes. Something like you, I would guess. Coalition forces didn't really like shit that couldn't be measured. I have a really good gut about where things are and what's coming. He looked down at me, his gaze intense. You're trembling. Adrenaline aftermath. You don't trust me. Not in the least. He knelt before me. He was so big, he was still taller than me when I was sitting. He placed a hand on my cheek. I could feel calluses on his fingers. Was going to jump out of my skin. I could see hints of the wolf prowling behind his eyes. I am but yours to command, Captain. I was helpless. Kiss me. His mouth met mine. My brain melted. My arms went around his torso. The one time he had to be wearing a shirt was the one time I wish he hadn't. I wanted more. There was pounding on the cockpit door. I pushed him away, but he refused to be moved. Instead he kissed a line down my neck. He was all coiled tension and muscle. The pounding on the cockpit door continued. I shoved at him harder and this time he drew back. No. We're done here. What are you afraid of, Captain? My heart was pounding, my face hot. And he stood up. I could see the wolf straining in his eyes, ready to escape. This is a fucking mistake. I turned back to the safety of my screens. There was a whisper in my ear. Come find me if you're brave enough. Captain. The door opened, letting in a nauseating stench. Red's voice echoed in. Captain, there is vomit all over the common area. The kids did not take going through that wormhole well. I sighed, got up and walked past him without looking. Of course they didn't. To my surprise, Ral pitched in with the cleanup of the common area, while I remained in the cockpit. Hours had passed since the firefight, and we were now in a relatively uninhabited area of space. Red had managed to even get the cloaking working. Now she insisted on taking a shift in the cockpit. In space this deep, the chances of us running into any ship was fractional. You need a break, Captain, Red said, taking her seat. Once we get to the boundaries of Ingo's wall, we need you as fresh as possible. Thanks, Red. It's only my life on the line here. What the whole dark did that werewolf do to my chair? I stood up and walked to the door. My quarters were behind the cockpit. Glanced into the common area. Ral was sitting there, his back to me as he played some tabletop game with the kids. Good. I didn't have the energy to figure him out. Hopefully, if I pretended the kiss had never happened, he would get the hint. The door to my quarters slid closed behind me. A white Spartan space greeted me. A gray chair hovered in the corner. The walls were bare save for a single First Earth poem projected on my wall. I sighed and the exo-armor scales slid back, exposing my neck, torso, legs, and finally bare feet. It became a heavy, dark brick laying next to me on the floor. A drawer in the wall opened beside me and I deposited it there. Stepping on the cloud-soft synth pelt on the floor felt good on my feet. One of the few luxuries I carried with me in my deployments. I tapped a panel in the wall and my bunk emerged from another drawer. I flopped down, drew the blankets up around me and sighed. It was good to be back in my own bunk. Except that it smelled of him. He had lain here, slept here in my bed. In the privacy of my own quarters, I wondered if he had thought about me. I rolled over and pulled the pillow over my head, but all it did was magnify his scent. This was stratospherically stupid. Pretty men were always trouble. The most handsome man I had ever met, well up until Ral, was a space pirate who had tried to kidnap me when I was younger. Had already spent years unpacking the trauma. I was fine now, but suffice it to say I knew not to trust the promises of gorgeous guys. I was no hag, but I knew I wasn't shiny enough to attract their attention on my own. But even so, I couldn't stop my body's response to a living, breathing embodiment of male virility, or think about his impossible response to mine. A response that had to be manufactured and calculated, I reminded myself. Damn him to the cold moons of Antares. A screen flashed on the wall. We were now within range. I sighed. Duty always called. I turned and enlarged the screen. A few swipes and taps got us into the secure military network. We exchanged call signs and codes. I reported what had happened. To my surprise, Commander Singh got on the line herself. I don't like it, pilot. There was a small lag. Seconds seemed to slow to a tense crawl. You don't know what those tigers are carrying. They've been through Deccan and scanned for trackers. Another lag, another batch of seconds gone. You should have requested permission to deviate. Ma'am, I wasn't in range to do so. Follow orders, pilot. What are we supposed to do with a bunch of tiger shifter kids? I don't know, ma'am. Try to figure out what the tiger shifters are doing. There was a sudden reply that was as steady as real-time. Comms in deep space were often like that. Random lags followed by real-time bursts. You know what it looks like? You snuck into their planet and illegally abducted their children. It's your word that they're being experimented on because, supposedly, the coalition has nothing to do with the whereabouts of their highnesses. Things are tense enough as it is. Are you trying to start a war? Ma'am, after Aurelia, we're already at war. The Council will be notified of your actions. Get your ship back here ASAP. Any more deviations from your orders, and you'll be grounded permanently. Sir, wait. The Prince has requested to speak with you. There was another silence, another lag. What does he want? I'll let him explain. I triggered the comms. Your Highness, Prince Ral, I need to speak with you. A moment later, there was a knock on the door. Come in. The door slid open and he stepped in. I suddenly felt as if the oxygen in the room had vanished. Stars, I should be used to the way his broad shoulders filled up the spaces in the ship by now. He gave me a look as if he knew exactly what I was thinking. Captain, he said by way of a greeting. His voice was polite, but the look in his eyes was not. What was he expecting? Me to succumb to uncontrollable hormones and drag him into bed? I was not. Sit down. I gestured to the bed. I spun my chair, turned my back to him. Wouldn't be so juvenile as to watch his face when he realized that I didn't call him here for sex. I flicked open the screen, typed a code. A static picture of Commander Singh with her severe face and left eye patch appeared. Commander Singh, Prince Ral is now present. The commander has some concerns about our mission. I floated my chair out of the way. To his credit, Ral took it all in stride. I appreciate the coalition's assistance, but I left soldiers behind in our escape. Once we arrive in Chandrayaan Station, I need this pilot to take me back to Altai and a special team to meet us to help me extract them. There was a lag before the commander's voice responded with a rather irritated quality. Your alpha predicted this might be a request. He stated that you were both to be taken to safety as soon as possible. My alpha is there, isn't he? I almost laughed. That didn't make any sense. To my surprise, Commander Singh asked Ral to hold. Suddenly a deep drawling voice startled us. I'm here, Ral. Father, Ral said, standing up. You know I'm not coming back without those soldiers. This is not a game. You think I don't know what you're doing? What you've done. That pilot needs to bring you home. The screen vanished. Ral turned and punched at the bulkhead, letting out a snarl. White fur rippled across his arm, his back, and just as quickly was gone. He rested his forehead against the wall for a moment, his body tense. I didn't blame him. He was trapped between honor and loyalty in a way that made rocks and hard places seem like feather pillows. He turned slowly toward me, his eyes circumspect as he took me in. I knew what he was asking without even asking. Absolutely not. No way to the whole dark moons of Antares 3. It's a smaller risk than you think with the right team. I shook my head. What team do we have? A bunch of emaciated kids. His eyes glowed. It was the look of a wolf before it attacks. I will get back my people with or without you. My armor solidified around me, responsive to my spike of alarm. Even with my exo-armor, I wasn't sure I could restrain him quickly enough to knock him out. With a sedative, I forced out an even voice. Are you threatening me now? The glow dimmed. He straightened, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. The sudden calm and control was actually more frightening. He opened his now human eyes. I'm not going back without my people. I pinched the bridge of my nose. I sympathized. I wanted to help, but I couldn't do it. Not after the last time I disobeyed orders. It won't work. He tilted his head. Do you think that will stop me? If you ask me, one should always go back for those left behind. I should lie and tell him yes. But the way that he looked at me made that lie stick in my throat. I couldn't help him, but at the very least I wouldn't lie to him. No. You need to do what you think is right. I paused, then added, as will I.